Hi, so welcome, Clark Strand. I'm so excited to meet you today in this conversation. You are the founder of Way of the Rose together with your wife, Perdita Finn, and that's what we're going to dive into today. Way of the Rose, what it is, what it stands for, and your relationship with Our Lady of Woodstock. So that
Thanks,
would,
Gertie. I'm happy to be here.
thank you. So that would be my first question. What's it like to meet the goddess? And how has your relationship with her developed over these past 13 years that you've known her?
Well, I mean, there are a lot of different answers to that question. I think that when somebody asks me that, my first impulse is to say, well, a lot of people have met her, and people are meeting her all the time. In the modern world, we've learned to sort of filter out experiences like this and or to talk ourselves out of them. When the book, The Way of the Rose, that Perdita and I wrote together, when it first came out, the book launch was held at the New York Open Center in Manhattan. And at one point, someone asked what I guess would be my very least favorite question to be asked publicly, which is, isn't it special or isn't it wonderful to experience an apparition of Our Lady? And I thought, well, how do I even answer something like that? It's not, Our Lady is in charge of those things, not me. And, if it's special, it's entirely because of her. So, I sort of closed my eyes and I thought, you know, what's really being asked here? What is the demand of this moment? And I looked around the room and suddenly I was filled with a really deep certainty. And so I asked, and how many people in this room? There were maybe 100 people. I said, how many people in this room tonight are here because they have had a life-changing experience with the lady? Because they saw her, because they heard her, because they felt some inexplicable, improbable sign manifest itself in their lives, which changed the course of their lives, got them to do something they otherwise wouldn't have done, set them on a new course. And almost every person raised their hand. Almost every person. And so I think, it's best to preface this by saying that, although maybe apparitions aren't, on everybody's, top 10 list of most common everyday experiences, nevertheless, they happen quite a lot. I noticed in a book I read a few years ago that the Catholic Church had noted, not authenticated or endorsed, but noted 500 apparitions since 1830 around the world. And if you look at how the Catholic Church handles things like this, and you do the math, you realize that the real number must be in the tens or even hundreds of thousands, because among those that are reported, only very, very few end up getting on their radar, getting investigated, right? And so this is happening quite a lot. The lady has been speaking, I think more and more and more and more urgently since the dawn of the modern age, since the Industrial Revolution, the beginning of the age of petrochemicals and fossil fuel burning. So as we get closer and closer to I guess the tipping point of some kind of environmental or ecological collapse, she appears more and more. So that's one answer. The other answer would be that, I was completely unprepared for this. I had spent my entire life devoted to, the first part of my life devoted to one very, very unapologetically patriarchal religious institution, which is Zen Buddhism. I was originally raised a Protestant, but there was no presence of the divine feminine whatsoever. I went to Zen Buddhism, where people talked about the mind-to-mind transmission of male patriarchs from the Buddha down to the present day, and there wasn't even lip service paid to anything that we would call the divine feminine, right, or the goddess. And after I left Zen Buddhism in 1990, and I explored many other spiritual traditions. I think I was unaware that what those traditions all had in common, which was that they were other patriarchal traditions. I studied Hindu spirituality, Vedanta, all different forms of Buddhism, Eastern Orthodox prayer practices, Jewish prayer practices. Uh, I didn't know at the time, but later on, Perdita said to me, he said, you spent 20 years trying to get patriarchy right. And that's basically what I did after I left Zen. I thought, well, Zen didn't work for me. Zen didn't quite work. So, but maybe one of these other, maybe it was the wrong patriarchy, right? I wasn't aware that that's what I was doing. I was just sidestepping into another tradition that was just more of the same. So the night that Our Lady of Woodstock first appeared, I think I realized probably within a few seconds that everything about my way of thinking was about to change. I was completely unprepared for it. There were no books on the divine feminine in my library, my vast library of spiritual texts, or none that I understood to be about the divine feminine. Later, I went back and found a lot of evidence of the lady in texts from all over the world. But at the time, I was blind to this reality. The night she appeared, I realized, oh, I've been, this whole time she's been there. She's always been there, and I've just never seen her. She's always been speaking, and I've just never listened. So that was my initial experience, was one of awe and shock, honestly, a sense of having been on the wrong path.
Quite the awakening. How would you describe your relationship with her now?
Well, my relationship to her is the same as everyone else's. I mean, she is there. She's always there. Um, I have the awareness that she's always there, and I think that once you begin to realize her presence, and really it's really more like a physical presence than some ethereal spiritual sort of thing. It's like she's always there. We sometimes say in Way of the Rose that Our Lady puts the mater back in matter, right? Those two words are related, matter with two T's and mater with one, mater meaning mother, matter meaning the physical substance of this world. And, Our Lady manifests all around us and in everything. And once we become attuned to that, we're open to that experience. We experience her all around us. So I would describe my relationship as intimate, but the intimacy is because of her, not because of anything special that I do or any special capacity. She keeps herself very close. She asked something of me very early on, which is that I basically write a book to report her words and the experiences that I'd had with her. The first book I wrote was Waking Up to the Dark. Waking Up to the Dark has four parts. The first three are about sleep science, paleoanthropology, ecology, climate change, so forth and so on. The last part, which is by far the shortest, only 3 pages long, is called The Gospel According to the Dark. Those are entirely her words. And when the book first came out in, I think, 2015, I want to say, um, the New York Times treated it, kind of like a book on sleep science, right? They asked me to write a op-ed piece, which I did, which got republished all over the world. But people wanted to read the book as a book on sleep science and, something for the Science Times crowd, as it were. And really, it was all about those last 3 pages. The entire book was nothing but the world's longest introduction to the world's shortest book, because the last 3 pages, which are her words, are really the substance of the book. And so, I did that. I published that book. And then Perdita and I, the next step was to write a book on the rosary, which is what she wanted next. And so Perdita and I wrote that book together. And so as we have, continued basically, follow her direction. Our lives have changed greatly. Her messages have been spread to people all over the world. There are now meetings, rosary meetings happening all over the world. And a lot of people are praying the rosary now in devotion to her without feeling obligated to embrace any kind of theological program, belong to any church, submit to the authority of the Catholic Church, or anything of the like. We're a group of people who follow a simple motto, ecology, not theology, right? So we tend not to get lost in theological speculation or debate or anything like that. But we pray the rosary for our heart's desire and remain rooted and grounded in our circles of friends who pray the rosary together.
Mm. In Germany, where the rosary is very much connected to the Catholic Church, like most places, but here particularly because Catholicism is a state religion, basically, and you pay taxes that then are given to the church, and there is religion instruction in public schools. So it's very much embedded in the societal structure, and there is no way of looking at any teaching outside of that structure. So anybody who is more liberal minded, for lack of a better word, or ecologically minded, would instantly turn away from the notion of the rosary. Of course, it's all about the Catholic Church. And when I talk to people here about it, they're like, forget it, nobody's going to pray the rosary, even if um, wrapped up in an ecological message. Um, and the way I experienced it as a child, as most people have, was very, led by a priest or somebody, and, full frontal authority. And it was boring. It was
Yeah,
boring
of
to say the rosary and stuffy.
course.
So how can one make the rosary appealing again?
Mm. Well, I think the rosary is, innately appealing and innately engaging. It's soothing. It places us in a liminal state that allows us to access our deeper intuitions, allows us to commune with the dead. The rosary is a kind of a portal that allows us to step into a much larger, richer world than we ordinarily experience. And it's always been that. I think the main thing that your readers and listeners probably need to know is that the Catholic Church actually knows very little about the Rosary. It isn't particularly interested in the history of the Rosary. A year or two ago, I remember I wrote a colleague of mine who is a scholar of the Rosary. He wrote a wonderful book called "Stories of the Rose," which is about the emergence of the Rosary during the Middle Ages. She's a scholar, and I don't believe she's Catholic. And I asked her a question about the earliest form of the Rosary, and she directed me to another person who might have the answer. And I wrote to him. He wrote back and he said, "You're one of 5 people in the entire world who has ever asked this question." And I
Mm,
said, "How can that possibly be? How can this, this is probably the most widely practiced single spiritual devotion in the world, right? In terms of its basic form. There are a lot of people doing, like in India and various other countries, there are a lot of people doing various different kinds of practices. And, if you group them all together, they're a lot bigger. But in terms of a single monolithic practice that people tend to pray in the same way all over the world, the rosary is probably the most popular. So how can it be that there is so little curiosity about the history of the rosary and so much obfuscation and just plain wrong information about its history, right? That people just don't criticize, that popes repeat endlessly, even though they know it's wrong. That priests recite from the pulpit constantly, even though it's been known for at least a century or so that it's all wrong, right? How does that happen? And he said, well, Catholics are only interested in Catholicism. They're not interested in the Rosary per se, right? They're interested in having their Catholic identity uh, uh, reinforced, and interested in things that reinforce their Catholic identity. Because Catholicism has increasingly, over the course of the modern age, become a spiritual identity rather than a spiritual devotion or even religion, and political identity increasingly. And so, it's really interesting. The Rosary is older than uh, than 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 Catholicism. It's older than Christianity. It's older than religion, really. If we look at what the Rosary really is, it is a mantric repetition of prayer prayed on beads or on some sort of a device, right? And if we go back and look back through history, we find that mantra probably originates sometime, in the Paleolithic. One scholar, a man named Fritz Stahl, believed that mantra actually predated language and that language came from mantra. He believed that mantras were originally created like bird songs to accompany certain physical rituals, gestures, or activities. And they infused those activities with a kind of a sacred quality, and they focused the attention. Gradually people began to recite the mantra when they weren't doing the physical activity, whatever it was, and it thereby began to stand for that physical activity or that object that they were engaging with, whereupon language and words were born. That's Stahl's theory, right? So we're talking about a practice that has its origins at the deepest strata of human culture, right? The deepest strata of human history. Beads also were among the very, very first objects that were made for non-utilitarian purposes. Beads were objects that were made because people wanted a talismanic object to hold, to move through their fingers, to wear for adornment, something that connected them to the matter of this world, right? The mater of this world, the mother. Likewise, the rosary, the name itself means basically a chaplet of roses. And the practice of weaving a chaplet of roses for the goddess goes back at least to Sumerian religion, right? It predates, uh, uh, Islam, Christianity, Judaism, even Hinduism. It goes way, way, way back. And even in Hinduism, the practice is at least 5,000 years old. The weaving of flowers as an offering to a goddess, right? And accompanied by a mantra. The mantra would be said as the flowers would be picked and as they would be woven into a crown. So, this, once you get me started, I could just go on forever. I mean, the 15 mysteries of the rosary are thinly disguised, uh, you know, revisiting of the mysteries, the Eleusinian mysteries and the other ancient mystery cults of the Mediterranean. Um, I think there's this myth that when Christianity came along, the quote pagan world just sort of immediately, converted to Christianity because it was clearly a better or more enlightened or more humanitarian approach to life. But the truth is, the people, the so-called pagans who converted to Christianity converted to Christianity because they thought it was the newest pagan cult because it's God of wine and bread, they completely recognized. The Virgin Mary was a recognizable figure to her. She wasn't a demure, a maiden or housewife from Galilee. She was an avatar, incarnation of the Great Mother. So people became Christian because they believed Christianity was a pagan cult,
Mm.
not because they believed it was better than paganism. They thought it was paganism. They embraced it because it was what they knew.
No, I seem to remember that you write in the book that it may even be older, that it made the first devotions to a mother goddess goes back to even the Stone Age. How far back can you go?
Well, we really don't know because we don't have the stories necessarily that go along with these these devotional objects that have come down in the archaeological record. Uh, One of the most interesting tells suggesting that devotion to the Great Mother is much, much older than human history, older than agriculture, right? Is that these Paleolithic goddess figurines, which are usually quite small. Hundreds of them have been found, in archaeological digs throughout the world, especially concentrated in those areas where human beings were living uh, anywhere from 20 to 40,000 years ago. Some of these are almost 40,000 years old. They're very small figures, all of women. They're meant to be, they don't have footing, so they're not meant to be set down anywhere because these weren't the people who lived anywhere. They didn't stay anywhere for very long. There were nomadic people moving around in small hunter-gatherer tribes, and they were meant to be held in the hand. So they were essentially like amulets, right? A way of holding the mother in your hand, the mother who embraced you through the earth itself, but this gave you a way of relating to her in a more intimate, personal way. You could actually hold her in your hand or kiss her, maybe tie her on a leather thong around your neck to wear as an amulet. Uh, these these uh, these objects are universal throughout the ancient or the what people call the Stone Age or the Paleolithic. The Upper Paleolithic is, we've found only probably the smallest fraction of these figurines. But, and they have all different shapes and sizes. It's not a kind of a one size fits all sort of thing, but they all have in common that they project a kind of a maternal blessing, a maternal presence. Today, we would call these figures representations of the Great Mother.
So let's talk a little bit about the community um, Way of the Rose, which happens, I believe, mainly on Facebook. Is that correct?
Well, it's on Facebook, it's on Zoom. It's we have face-to-face meetings now. Before the pandemic, we were the face-to-face meetings were spreading very quickly around the world. People were starting regular weekly meetings where people could show up and meet one another in real time. The pandemic hit, and suddenly we realized that we couldn't meet together face to face. We'd have to meet on Zoom. And I don't know, it didn't take very long. We went from, I think, having one Zoom meeting to having, 50 or 60 Zoom meetings in a matter of months. And then from there, it just kept growing. I'm not sure how many we have today, but they're usually anywhere from 5 or 6 to 10 meetings a day. People can just go to our website, wayoftheRose.org, and go to the calendar, and it'll list the meetings available for that particular day at different times. So there's Zoom meetings. There's the Facebook group where people come together and they pray the rosary on their own, but they share their experiences on the Facebook group. Facebook group now, I think, has somewhere around maybe 28,000 members from all over the world.
What do you observe? What is the desire or the purpose when people join, and how do they um, what do you observe how they develop over the years, if there's
Hmm.
something can be said about that?
Well, there's no I think there's no single uh, scenario. There's no single trajectory for people coming into our fellowship. I'll tell you that we get people from all different cultural and religious backgrounds. We get people from all over the world. Many people who join our fellowship were raised Catholic, and so they knew about the Rosary and had some awareness of Our Lady, or maybe even a devotion to Our Lady within their family system. And but they fell away from the church, and they come in and they oftentimes describe themselves as Catholic in recovery, right? And they don't want anything to do with the church. They don't share its political views. They don't. They don't even think of themselves as Christian many times. But they miss the lady. They miss the rosary. They miss the connection with that guiding maternal presence. And they miss spiritual community, right? Just because people have left the church doesn't mean they've left the need for spiritual community behind them, right? That's a basic human need. And so they come to us for that. Uh, People come for all kinds of different reasons. We have a set of questions that people answer, before they can participate in the group. And so, one of those is, how did you hear about us? Why are you here? I'll just give you a sprinkling of things people might say. One girl, 16-year-old girl, said, I'm here because my grandmother told me I should belong to this group, right? Okay, the next day I'll get an email from a woman who's in her 80s and says, I'm joining your group because my college age granddaughter or great granddaughter told me I should join this group. I'm joining this group because my sister belongs to this group or my friend recommended it, right? So oftentimes it's word of mouth. Sometimes people will see a post that's been shared from the group and they'll be intrigued and so they'll check us out. Oftentimes nowadays people have read one of the books in the Way of the Rose trilogy. First book is Waking Up to the Dark. Second is The Way of the Rose. And the third is Take Back the Magic. I wrote the first book. Perdita and I wrote the second together. And the third, Take Back the Magic, was written by her. And people read one of those books and, they all mention Way of the Rose. And people, I think those are books that when people finish them, they want more. But they don't want just more to read. They want something to do. They want to participate in or experience the world that they've read about in this book, or they want to experience the world around them in the way that's described in those books. And so Way of the Rose gives them a place to come to have and share those kinds of experiences. So I think increasingly that's the way people come. They've read the book or heard about the book.
One of the things that come up, or is one topic that's being debated, is miracles. People
Mm, yeah.
have obviously things they pray for, and often there are references to miracles. Um, can you name a few examples of what may have come to pass?
Oh my gosh, there's so many. I mean, miraculous cures, for instance, it's very common. Um, I'll tell you a story from very early on in Way of the Rose in our local face-to-face group, because it's a very ordinary kind of story, but it was very shocking at the time. People in our, I want to say the apparitions began in 2011, and we had a small group here in Woodstock. Mostly people didn't know anything about the apparition. We didn't talk about it that much publicly, and it was still very new. So I had a group that got together and prayed the rosary, and people would pray for miracles or for interventions for various different things. A woman who was sure she couldn't buy a house, didn't have the finances for it, has been told it was impossible, prayed for a house. And that very next week, somebody approached her with, and told her about a special program that had been started for people like her. And she bought her house within a month.
Hmm.
That was one, but the very ordinary kind of miracle, but still something she experienced as a miracle. Another night, a woman brought her dog to the meeting. Now, people used to constantly bring their dogs to the meeting back then. And, most people had dogs. So oftentimes there'd be 4 or 5 dogs in a room while we were praying. And this dog we knew, we were used to, but she had just been to the vet and the vet had x-rayed her dog and found that it was riddled with cancer, tumors all over her body. And so she prayed that there be some treatment or that, the cancer go into remission or something like that. And she prayed that night. She went back the next day to the vet and said, do the x-ray again. And there were no tumors. The dog lived for years longer after that.
Hmm. Wow.
So, there were many, many other things like that. Today, all you have to do is go to a Way of the Rose meeting, on Zoom or face to face to hear miracles, extraordinary stories. I will say that one of the big differences between Way of the Rose and the way that the Rosary is prayed in official Catholic circles today. Now, I'm not talking about the way it's prayed, like, for instance, in Mexico or South America or in Indonesia or countries where there's still a very, very strong folk family tradition of the Rosary. In those places, people are actively, constantly praying for miracles. But in the developed nations of the world, where the Catholic Church is as much a political institution as it is a religious entity, people mostly pray the Rosary to perform Catholic affiliation or
Hmm.
solidarity with the quote intentions of the Pope, right, or solidarity with the faith. The rosary has been used to fight abortion. It's been used by the church recently to oppose, LGBTQ rights. It's been used in all kinds of ways, as a kind of a political cudgel, right? Very rarely is it used in such settings to pray for miracles. In fact, you can go to a lot of rosary meetings and never, in Catholic settings in America, and never hear anyone pray for a miracle. Never. I mean, there's some where you will, but you could go to 10 in a row and not hear one person pray for a miracle
Hmm.
unabashedly, like I need this miracle, right? Mostly you won't hear anybody pray at all because they'll just say the rosary and maybe then they'll mutter something to themselves and the priest will be at the front and it'll be that kind of a experience you described as a child of it being kind of boring or performative or perfunctory. The difference is that we hearkened back in Way of the Rose to a medieval approach to the rosary, which was all about miracles. People prayed the rosary for miracles. That was why they prayed it. They didn't pray it to express their theological beliefs. They didn't. It wasn't. The rosary wasn't taught by parents to their children as a kind of a theological delivery device. It was given to their children. The parents would say basically, these are your sacred magical spells. When you need something desperately, when you're in trouble, when you're sick, when you're in danger, when the soldiers are coming, this is what you do. This is what you pray. This is the lady who will save you. If you go back and you look at the writings about the Virgin Mary during the Middle Ages, most of them take the form of miracle stories. And in fact, there are a lot of books like The Miracles of Our Lady of Rocamadour that are centered around a particular lady, statue of a lady, in a particular shrine or church or basilica, where people would make pilgrimages to pray for miracles. Our Lady of Rocamadour, a scribe sat at the entrance to her shrine in I think it was the 12th century for like 2 years. Sat at and he just wrote down the stories that people told him of the miracles she had performed during those 2 years, and that's the book we have today, The Miracles of Our Lady of Rocamadour. And they range from, a very rich lady lost her pet starling and she was distraught, right? We're talking about somebody very pampered and privileged. And she would just cry and moan and, all day long for the loss of this bird. And, her servants finally got sick of listening to it. They opened the door to the cage and they prayed to Our Lady of Rocamadour and the bird flew right back in. So that's a very simple, ordinary, but very famous miracle.
Wow.
But then you've got a story of a knight who, had been captured by his adversaries. And it's like an action movie or something. And he's like, he flees from his, he flees from his captors. They capture him, they put him in dungeons. He prays to Our Lady of Rocamadour. She somehow gives him the wherewithal to get free of his shackles. Then he climbs up, but then they attack him. In the main hall of the building, he climbs up into the rafters, up this tower, and they're waiting down below, and men are coming up the steps. And finally, he has nothing to do but entrust himself fully to Our Lady of Rocamadour. So he hurls himself off the tower and he
Mhm.
falls on them. and they break his fall, and he gets up unhurt and simply walks away. This is one of the miracles. But others, miraculous healings from cancer, the return of a herd that had been stolen, all kinds of things. And during the Middle Ages, this is why people prayed the rosary. They would go to a statue of the lady because they believed that she lived in the matter of that statue, that the mater was in the matter.
Mm.
They would say the rosary as a kind of a summoning spell to call her forth from the statue, and she would answer their prayers. And then they would word would spread, and this is how the rosary spread. The rosary spread initially because of the miracles that were performed through saying it. It wasn't like there were manuals that were passed from hand to hand. There were these miracle stories that got repeated over and over again. People heard them and said, "I think I'll pray the rosary."
Mm. How important in your observation is faith in that?
Well, faith has been weaponized by religion in modern times, and faith has been used to shame people. Faith has been misused. The word has been misused so much that I'm almost hesitant to say that faith is important. I think what's most important is to pray for your heart's desire and see what happens. Because if you pray for your heart's desire, pray the rosary daily in some way, especially if you do it with a group of other people and you have some support for that, what is going to happen is your prayers are going to be answered. Sometimes you get dramatic answers right away. Sometimes it takes a little while, but the prayers will begin to be answered. And if you're in a group, you'll hear about other people's answered prayers as well. This gives us the courage to pray for things that we might have thought were impossible or things that we didn't think we could pray for.
Mm.
Uh, we might find ourselves praying for secret, hidden desires that we haven't even dared to utter to ourselves. Things that have been with us since our childhood, maybe, right? Since we were teenagers. Things that we really wanted or yearned for in life. A good relationship, success as a poet or an artist. Some sort of financial security. I mean, people who are raised in chaotic situations, people who've been raised in alcoholic families or families with addiction or families with financial troubles may, as they grow older, they may yearn for just some simple stability, not for riches or, glorious capital gains or, but just for the stability of enough to meet their needs, not to feel anxious all the time. So they may pray for that. And as those prayers get answered, faith begins to grow like a seed within the heart.
Mm.
So it isn't something that, people say, have faith. I always hate it when people say you should have faith. It would be better to say you need to get some faith. Maybe, how do I get faith? Well, come to a meeting, pray for your heart's desire, and listen to other people's stories, right? You can get faith doing that, right? Faith is something you just have or just, muscle your way into, right? You have to have some actual proof. And now, that was a term that was used by the Japanese Buddhist priest Nichiren. Nichiren believed that people should constantly test the power of prayer. Test the power of prayer by praying for something and then see what happens. And wait until you get actual proof. And as you get actual proof, your faith deepens. And the more your faith deepens, the more actual proof you get. That was his Nichiren's advice. It was excellent advice because it basically said, start from where you are, work your way from the bottom up, be honest about your desires, pray for their fulfillment. It really put Buddhism, on a stable footing for the first time that appealed to ordinary people.
Mm. As I'm listening and thinking about heart's desires and miracles, um, I've been praying for heart's desires for 5 years or so, and some of them were totally came through, and others just kind of keep dragging on. But when I pray for divine intervention, it happens like this. I don't do
Ah.
that all that often because, I don't use it. But but it is
Um,
funny how I phrase it or how you frame it, uh, and maybe there's a different urgency behind it. I don't know. You tell me.
I think each of us is different. I will say that once you are on the path of the heart's desire, and you experience yourself as being on that path, like once you have prayed for your heart's desire and had prayers answered, even if every prayer hasn't been answered, but some prayers have been answered, and you begin to feel that you're on a path. And once you're on that path, something happens. And I've seen this over and over again. People start to relax. Something unclenches within us. Like once the heart is addressed, the heart is a muscle, right? And muscles can get cramped and can be restricted. They can they cannot function optimally, right? And once we begin to pray for the heart's desire and address the desires of the heart rather than the desires of empire, the opposite of the heart's desire is the desires of empire, the desires that empire will give you and tell you are your desires and manipulate you into pursuing and wasting your whole life on, right? Those are the desires of empire. We know what they are, right? Make a lot of money, be a good citizen, stay out of jail, like there are all kinds of things, right? There's always a carrot and a stick, you know. But the heart's desires are very different. And once we begin to address the desires of the heart relaxes. And something interesting happens to time. Instead of feeling like I've only got so much time for this prayer to be answered, we begin to feel like I've got forever for this prayer to be answered. I've got eternal life ahead of me. I've got lifetime after lifetime after lifetime. And these prayers unfold, these answers to these prayers unfold in the time that is most natural to them in the most optimal possible way, right? That's how Our Lady works.
That's exactly what's happening right now for me. That
Wonderful.
it used to be, oh, I have to have this heart's desire address and then that and then the other thing, like the empire kind of way. And only now, I've recently reread this message. I don't know what it's entitled, but it says, you move at the speed of life.
Yeah.
And I've read that message before, but it didn't sink in. I didn't understand it. And only now, I don't know why, but for some reason, all the pressure is gone, even though there's lots of pressure, technically. I don't feel it anymore. I'm not invested in any of this stuff. I just trust. And that's why I asked about faith, But I see that there's a big difference between trust and faith, right?
Yeah. We should let your viewers know that the message you're referring to is a message from Our Lady of Woodstock, and she delivers a new message on the 16th of every month, and it's posted on our website, wayoftherose.org. So you can read all of her messages there, going back pretty much to the beginning.
Thank you for adding that. One of the major things I understand Way of the Rose to be is to remember the sacred feminine. Along the way, as we learn more about what she talks about and how she suggests we live that is much saner than what we're used to. At some point, you come to the concept of heroes, gamos, the union of male and female. Um, when we talk about the sacred feminine, one can interpret that as, well, it's all about the goddess, and the male factor or the masculine factor doesn't matter much. How do you define that relationship between or how can one redefine that relationship between the male and female in a saner way?
Right. Well, for me, ecology is sanity, and ecological understanding grounds us in whatever theological storyline we may be operating with. Right. The ancient mystery religions were very good at this because they superimposed the story of gods and goddesses over the story of the four seasons, right? The cycle of generation and decay and regeneration that defines life on Earth as plants grow and reseed, enter the soil, go through a period of dormancy, only to wake up again in spring, right? So the ancient mystery cults of the Mediterranean and Upper Africa, lower and lower Europe, these mystery religions came up with stories that express this cycle. If you look at the 15 mysteries of the Rosary, right, the first five are, the mysteries of birth. The next five are the mysteries of death, and the last five are the mysteries of resurrection and renewal, right? So they follow the same circular pattern. During the Middle Ages, when the 15 mysteries of the Rosary, which are just episodes from the life of Mary and Jesus, right? It begins with the Annunciation, the angel speaking to Mary, then it goes, on to through the nativity, the finding at the temple, the events of the crucifixion, the resurrection, and then it gets to the end, the 15th mystery. In the Middle Ages, the priests wanted the rosary to end like the New Testament, wanted it to end with the last judgment, with Revelation. And they went out of their way to write little tracts about this and to try to conform the rosary, which was basically a folk tradition. They wanted to conform it theologically to the timeline of the New Testament. But ordinary people wouldn't do it. They didn't these weren't literate people. They didn't write rebuttals or say, or publish their own books or anything like that. They just said, yeah, we're not doing that. And so the way they decided to end the rosary was with Our Lady being assumed into heaven and then crowned as Queen of Heaven and Earth, after which the whole cycle starts over again in that circle, right? So circles, not lines. The New Testament, the whole Bible itself is a big, long, linear thought experiment that asks what happens to a species that seizes control over the entire world, right? And everything in it, declares dominion over all the creatures, right? What happens to a world when one species does that? And the answer is revelation. So it's this linear going off a cliff storyline. Uh, People who prayed the rosary, these were people who were only very, very thinly Christianized. They were really pagan at the core, and their beliefs were more in accordance with the natural world. They took their bearings off what they saw happening in nature. What happens in nature is that everything repeats endlessly. Everything that dies is reborn. Everything that decays, right, is reconstituted to form new life. These were people who lived very close to the earth. So in modern times, we have begun to reclaim some of this teaching, but it comes to us through ecology, not through theology. So that, for instance, when the United Nations convened the first ever conference to talk about the environment, the global environment in the early 1970s. At the end of that conference, where they passed certain resolutions declaring that the Earth had rights, right? The planet itself had rights that had to be protected. They asked a group of concerned ecologists and poets and thinkers to produce a document, and they did. The group is called the Friends of the Earth, and they produced this document, the essence of which is contained in one paragraph. So I'm going to botch it a little bit. I can't remember it word for word, but what it says basically is that the entire world we live in is composed of chains, vast chains of plants and animals that are constantly circulating over and over and over again, feeding one another. Whatever eats is also eaten. Whatever chemicals are produced by life can be used by life. over and over and over again, world without end, amen. And that the only thing needed for life is the driving force of the sun. It's the only thing that comes to the earth from outside of the earth. It's the only thing that's necessary for life that isn't already on the planet. Now, I read this and I went back to I went back to art from the high Middle Ages, right? And I looked at those paintings of the Annunciation, and over and over and over again, I saw the same motif being played out, which is that the angel comes to announce to Mary, right, that the Christ child she's to give birth to the Christ child, right? And the Christ child just means life, right? Christ just, in the symbolic framework, the Christ child is the life of the earth, right? And you see this ray of light coming from a high window, coming down and touching Mary. At the moment of conception, she is impregnated with the divine logos, or this light, this beam of light, right? So it is the Annunciation, which is the first mystery of the Rosary, is a symbolic representation of an ecological truth that people felt in their bones. They knew this was true. People spoke about God in the heaven and, our Father who art in heaven, but really what they mean is the sun, that
Mm.
energy which is necessary for all life on earth and which regulates the pattern of the seasons, right? And look, we're finding out now what happens when we tamper with that ancient rhythm, right? That power of the sun becomes overpowering. Planet heats up, right? And the seasons shift and change and things are set in disarray. But the sun is the great regulator, right? That holds life on earth in balance. But all that life emerges from within itself with nothing but light added to the mix. There's your virgin birth, right? There is the woman who can bring forth life from within her, right? Without the need for a man. And so when we play with that and we look at these ancient stories, we realize that the divine masculine is as essential as the divine feminine, in that hieros gamos, or divine union. In order, life won't occur unless both are present. But the body of the earth and our own bodies, right, are they're infused with that energy of the sun, but they are also grounded in the mother, right? We come from her, we return to her. Everything that comes out of her goes back to her endlessly, forever, right? World without end. So, that's pretty much how I understand it. It's not that the divine feminine is a uh, something monolithic or separate. Nevertheless, if you look at the structure of the rosary, you find that there are 10 Hail Marys for every Our Father be, right? So it's clearly a devotion to the divine feminine that situates us and roots us in the lives that we have, right? I think that's really the message of the rosary, is that it doesn't ask you to go to heaven. It asks you to be on earth and to trust the heavens.
To trust the heavens. There's one term, I don't remember who coined it first or introduced it first, whether it was Perdita or your daughter, Sophie Strand, of romantic animism. Is that something that fits into the concept of Way of the Rose?
Well, I seem to remember. I don't know who came up with that idea. It might have been Sophie. It sounds like Sophie, but I won't say it's necessarily her. Uh, our daughter Sophie Strand is an author as well, and grew up in this household where things like we've been discussing now are always a topic of conversation. And she's written wonderful books. She has a book that I think is coming out next year, "The Body is a Doorway," which is a memoir. She's written The Flowering Wand and also a novel, The Madonna Secret, an epic novel of first century Palestine, a retelling of the Gospels in a way that will change the way you think about them forever. I can pretty much guarantee.
And
Uh,
very
but
entertaining.
romantic animism, I'm not, I, not drawing a blank. I think I know what she or Perdita may have meant by that, but I will say that animism is the animism was pretty much the religion of human beings before religion. Before religion, there was animism. People across the earth believed that the entire world was alive and everything in it was alive. Rocks were alive, the weather was alive, sticks and stones, not just plants and animals. And their relationship to these things was they experienced themselves as on an equal footing with all the many other beings in their environment, and they with whom they related very intimately as brothers and sisters. St. Francis tried to regain some of that when he wrote about brother sun and sister moon. Right? He tried to, I think, reclaim some of that animistic flavor, and the Franciscans even today, veer in that direction. Uh, but this was mostly lost as with the rise of anthropocentric ways of thinking during the axial age. The great religions of the world all share one thing in common, and that is that they are profoundly anthropocentric at their core. They place a premium on human welfare and human destiny, which they believe is the point of all existence. Buddhism believes this. Christianity believes this. Hinduism, all the major religions share the same core anthropocentric point of view, right? They may have animistic currents flowing through them still that are leftovers from the Paleolithic, but they're not primarily animistic religions. There are a few holdouts among indigenous people. And even in places like Japan, you find Shinto, which is basically an animistic form of religion. So there are some holdouts from ancient times, but for the most part, animism has disappeared. They're replaced by modern, scientific, uh, uh, pragmatic, utilitarian ways of thinking that basically see the entire non-human world as a resource or a commodity, something to be manipulated, something to be controlled. And look at where that's got us, right? Not where we want to be.
Mhm. You had mentioned earlier the Gospel according to the dark. Am I saying that right?
Yes, you are.
Um, which is a message of a major cataclysm coming, that something will have to be rebalanced in a violent way because we didn't have the mind, honestly, to prevent that, or the heart. Um, but that background of this kind of being at the very beginning of the Way of the Rose isn't really discussed much. At least I'm not seeing it discussed much. Is that intentional? And what's the thought behind it?
Well, the message that you're talking about, which is her longest message that she's delivered to date, is the Gospel according to the dark, and it came very early on. This would have been in sometime in October. I did not make a note of the exact date when it happened. Um, this was in the beginning. She really her utterances were very, very brief and very short. Otherwise, I wouldn't be able to remember them. And so I would write down the things she said and record them. And some of her sayings, I think, that have guided our community the most came during those first few weeks. She said, for instance, the rosary is my body, and my body is the body of the world. Your body is one with that body. What cause could there be for fear? Right? She said that. She also told me one night, if you rise to say the rosary tonight, a column of saints will support your prayer. There were other things, but they were equally short. Um, Later on, Perdita would write them down so that Our Lady could speak, at her leisure and deliver longer messages. And I would, recite what I was being told, and Perdita would write them down. And that's how the messages are delivered today. But at this point, this would have been around October of 2011. And one afternoon, Perdita went into town with the kids on some errand. I was gone an hour or two. And I had recently uh, been told by Our Lady that she wanted me to write a book. I said to her at one point, should I didn't know what to do. I'm not Catholic, have no desire to be Catholic. I'm not even religious. Uh, and although I'm, spiritually literate enough to know that when you have an apparition of a figure that appears to be the Virgin Mary or some version of her, you're supposed to go to the local bishop and report it. I wasn't sure what was expected of me. So I said, is this what you want? Do you want me to go to the Catholic bishop? I couldn't imagine going to the Catholic bishop and reporting the apparition I had seen. Our Lady seemed breathtakingly uninterested in the Catholic Church or its hierarchy. Breathtakingly uninterested would be the way I would describe it. She once told me that she did not see the church as real. She said, only hearts are real. Institutions are not real. Only hearts are real, she said. So I couldn't imagine going to going to the Catholic bishop and reporting the apparition and saying, "Oh, by the way, she doesn't see her institution as having any fundamental reality, kind of an illusion." Uh, so so she said no. She says the editors are the bishops now. I want you to write a book. So it would be hard to describe how I felt when she said that. Uh, I felt like I was so far out of my depth as a writer, as a person, as a thinker, uh, as a, you know, person, who's devoted myself to, spiritual pursuits since, my teenage years. I felt completely out of my depth. I had no idea how to write a book about what I was experiencing. Um, so I was really at a loss. Uh, And so that afternoon, I was saying the rosary upstairs in our bedroom, lying on the bed. And I said, how can I write a book about something that I don't understand? And the moment I said that, she was there in the room, standing right beside the bed next to me. And this was one of the very rare times when I saw her in the daylight. Normally it was at night, uh, either in our house or when I was out on a walk. And so she took my hand, my left hand, and she placed it on her chest between her breasts. And she put her hand over my hand, and then she put her hand over my chest, over my heart. And I put my hand over her hand. So there was a kind of a circuit almost, you could say. And the only way I could describe it later was like a history of the world in 9.5 seconds. And I felt like my heart stopped. I wasn't sure. I thought I might be having a heart attack. And at the end of those, you know, few seconds, she released my hand and removed my hand from her chest, and she said, "Now write." And I don't remember anything about the next hour. All I know is that when I came to myself again, there in the notebook next to the bed was the Gospel according to the dark. And the handwriting is mine, but the words are definitely not mine. I would never have written such a thing. I couldn't imagine the things she said, right? So that's the document. You mentioned that it talks about predicts an apocalypse, and I think you used the word violence. What's striking to me is that it is so loving. There's really no violence in it, but it is very, very sobering. I mean, you can't read these 3 pages. I think it's 8 paragraphs long. You cannot read them and come out the other side of them feeling that life as we know it now, civilization itself, has much of a future. It is to read that And to really take it in is to experience the undoing, or as she describes it, the unwriting of everything that we have done. But it's not the unwriting of us. And she makes that clear. She says over and over again that you experience this as a loss. You experience this as defeat. You experience this as the end of everything. But it is not. This is not the end of you. This is the beginning of you, right?
Mm.
Over and over again, she says the same thing. And she talks about holding. She says every particle of you is held in my embrace. She says things like this over and over again. It's incredibly consoling and beautiful. Why don't people constantly quote it in Way of the Rose, right? Why don't they read it at meetings? Because not very many people do. Why don't we have a study group that studies it? Why, is this her first prolonged message? And the thing that she said summarized, Our Lady herself said summarized her teaching more than any other message she's given. Right? She said every other message she would give would just be an elaboration of these 3 pages, right? Of this gospel. The only answer I can say is that this is guidance for our deep future. We can't take it in now. I can't take it in. People ask me sometimes what it means, and I say, well, I understand the words. I take it in. I have a lot of feels when I read it, right? And I always come out the other side of reading it feeling strangely calm inside, sobered, steadied, calm. But I don't come out the other side of it feeling like suddenly I understand everything. If anything, my understanding has been deconstructed by those 8 paragraphs. And so if you compare those to the other messages that she delivers on a monthly basis, the messages are pretty consoling and pretty simple, pretty easy to understand. They're very practical, right? There's a lot of hand holding. There's a lot of soothing. There's a lot of motherly practical guidance would be the way I would describe it, right? About how to negotiate life, right? So I don't know. Sometimes I think that, we get the mother and the messages, and then the gospel according to the dark, we get the grandmother.
Mm.
These
Beautiful.
are the words of the oldest mother of all,
Mhm.
the one who's seen ice ages and meteor collisions and epochs of drought, and the one who has seen us through so many climate catastrophes over the course of our long history that she's probably lost count of them at this point. But the one who is always there and ready to lead us and guide us through them. I feel like that's the mother who's speaking in the gospel according to the dark.
That's beautiful. And that's ultimately what drew me in to the way of the rose, that there is an acknowledgement of we can't possibly go on the way we have been. But the talk of doom that is very ubiquitous doesn't help, right? It's just anxiety producing. And
Yeah, you have to feel her embrace. You have to feel yourself held by her. Otherwise, you can't take it in.
Mhm.
Um, I think that's the thing is that people ask, you know, Perdita and me all the time. They say, well, how do you know the things you know about what's happening in the world and what's coming? You know, not the things we can speculate about, but the things that we definitely know are coming, because human beings aren't capable of averting them. How do you metabolize all of it? How do you live with joy? How do you go on? Why do you get people to pray the rosary? Does it even make a difference? I mean, we get asked these questions all the time. And our answer is always that we can take in these realities because of Our Lady, because we pray the rosary, because we pray for our heart's desire, because this is what steadies us and calms us down and gives us, a feeling of trust and a feeling of being loved and cared for and watched over. Right. That's the reason why we can talk about these things and acknowledge the peril that we are in as a species.
Which ultimately makes it or turns it into a message of hope.
It does. It is a message of hope. Definitely. I mean, the Gospel according to the Dark is a very, very, very hopeful document, but it's a big document. It's a big gospel. It's just 3 pages long, but it's the biggest thing I've ever read.
Mhm.
I've read, my library is filled with spiritual texts and tomes and ancient treatises and sutras, and this is the biggest thing I've ever read. So
So there's one more question, and I don't know if you want or can answer it. I've just reread the Way of the Rose book, and there is one message in it where she talks about a great wind coming,
yeah,
great storm coming. And in it, she says, to wait for that storm to arrive, training your eyes anxiously upon the horizon, is not to understand what a storm is and what it means. A storm is not something that happens to you, but something that happens through you. The wind and your being are one.
mm,
So I interpret that sort of as a message she gives us to what are we doing in the meantime, right? Right
right.
now, we're all still cozy and whatever we think we do in this life. Uh, but a wind is coming and we don't know when or how or whatever. But what do we do in the meantime? And
Yeah.
that seems to relate to that question. What do you make of that?
Well, I think that entire message is worth reading, and maybe there's a way to include a link to it. Whatever. If you include this, in your YouTube video or whatever, because the entire message unpacks that a little bit more. But basically, the wind that she is talking about is us and her, the earth itself, a wind of change, drastic change. But it's also a purifying wind. It's like the March wind that's been coming through all this past week and, littering the ground with limbs and twigs, right? But this is how it provides space for new growth. This is how it clears itself out and allows the new buds to come out. Right, the dead limbs are broken off and scattered, and they go back to the earth and they nourish the trees that are even now beginning to put out buds. Right, so it's that wind is isn't something to fear, isn't something that's separate from us, but it is something we participate in. And one of the things she says in that message is that the birds and the earthworms and the various creatures they don't fear a storm. They know what it is. They participate in it. They use it, right? They allow themselves to be moved about by this wind. They ride it, right? I think that for me, one of the biggest eye openers of the past 10 or 15 years was to realize, how deeply embedded in anthropocentric ways of thinking the entire environmental movement is. There is this belief that we can solve, using the tools of empire, the problems that empire has created. And this is delusion. Human beings won't be able to solve the problems they have created by using the very tools that created those problems in the first place, or the mindset that created them. Furthermore, it isn't in our nature to act globally as a species to forestall a disaster that not only have we created, but that we are act so actively and deeply invested in even today that we won't stop. Our solutions themselves will be only ways of further perpetuating the mass delusion that has caused the the sixth extinction, and the climatological disarray that we are living through today. And so there's a tremendous amount of peace that comes from knowing that human beings will not fix this problem. And there is a trust that comes from knowing that Our Lady, the earth, will fix it, can fix it. We can't fix it, but we can allow ourselves to be part of the solution, right? One of the big problems that we run into over and over again in our writing, Perdita and me and Sophie too, is this idea that this conflation of human civilization and human culture. When we talk about the fact that civilization, which is really, depending on how you measure such things, maybe as old as 12,000 years, uh, maybe as young as 5,000 years, right? When we advance the idea that this has an expiration date, that in fact we are nearing the end of what human beings have called civilization, right? Um, People get very freaked out because they say, that's it for us, we're done. People are so invested, we are so invested, all of us are so invested in civilization that we can't imagine anything else. When in reality, our species came down a long path, a long road of evolutionary history, during very little of which did we have civilization. What we had was culture. Human culture and human civilization are not the same. And we talk about the heart's desire, the real heart's desire for a human being is mostly connected to culture, it's connected to family, friendship, art, food, love, dance, song, all the things that bring us joy, all the things that bind us together, right? Not about conquest, it's not about greed, it's not about things, right? Not at its core. Culture really isn't about those things. We've had human culture going back for tens of thousands, probably hundreds of thousands of years, and really way back beyond that. We just probably we reach a certain point probably in our evolutionary history where we can't recognize culture for what it is because it's so different from ours. Neanderthal culture, for instance, right? Early Homo sapiens culture, right? It existed, but we wouldn't we wouldn't know what we were looking at. It's probably always been there. So we have come down to the present moment on a very long path, and we can continue into the future on a very long path if we allow ourselves to be guided. But the collapse of civilization is going to be a very fraught and dangerous terrain. And those people who think that they can game it, think that they can avoid it, think that they can forestall it or profit off of it, uh, they're just deluded. I mean, that's not going to happen.
That's the
We're
one thing
not going to be
evolution.
able to game it. We're not going to be able to game it. And I think, people will get hurt as they try to do that. What we've learned is that there's a certain moment when you have to take your hands off the wheel. And then that's the moment for prayer. But that's also the moment when you return to yourself and you return to your animal nature and your deeper human nature. You know, what is it that makes us most deeply human? That's what will carry us through, right? Meanwhile, people are trying to figure out how to upload our consciousness into the cloud, or turn us into transhuman objects, and or go to another planet, or there are all kinds of fantasies about how we're going to avoid this. But the unraveling of one thing is the making of another. And that's another theme of the gospel according to the dark, is this unraveling is so that there can be a reweaving. So she says, at one point, she says, I am taking that which is of no value and making something new. What is spent and of no longer of any use, and making it into something new.
It is very comforting, but it's a process. It's not an easy process to go from facing all these things to arriving at a place of sanity. It's not.
Yeah.
So now we're pretty much out of time. So you tell me if you want to take a couple more minutes to talk about this new book that you're writing right now.
Well, Perdita and I are busy writers and we're always working on projects. So we're trying to carve out, because this is a book we're writing together, like Way of the Rose, trying to carve out some time we can both sit down and work on it together. We have a lot of writing, but the basic idea of the book is that there is a way of cohering in spiritual community that is older than civilization, right? The way that human beings gathered together and related to one another in the Upper Paleolithic that still exists today in certain places. It's among certain indigenous peoples. It exists in the culture of Alcoholics Anonymous. It exists in Way of the Rose. It exists in a few places, lingers in a few places around the world. And it's called a reverse dominance hierarchy. What we know today throughout the world is almost exclusively dominance hierarchies. Everything is organized, according to patriarchal lines of authority from top to bottom. Even those things that seem to be, not for profits or, collectives that seem to be organized in other ways really default to the cultural imperative to have legal entities, financial entities, people in charge, and areas of responsibility and specialization. What we're talking about is a reverse dominance hierarchy is a group that functions to prevent any individual or group of individuals from seizing control over the culture of the group, so that the culture of the group is protected from that. And all of these groups have in common the fact that the heart's desire of each individual is central, the centrality of that idea. You find it in Alcoholics Anonymous, where the heart's desire is for sobriety. You find it among the Soka Gakkai, which is a Japanese Buddhist group we've studied, which is another good example of it. You find it there for the desire. The heart's desire is rooted in ordinary life, the desires, but also extends to the great desire for peace among people. Uh, you find it. You found it in hunter-gatherer cultures where there was no leader as such, right? But people would move about, sharing what they needed, where there was, uh, equality among the sexes, and where there wasn't a tremendous amount of specialization because everyone had the basic skills that they needed to survive. And so we written a book that articulates the basic principles of this kind of spiritual community. Spiritual community, basically after patriarchy, is what we're looking at. And it really asks the question as large scale human endeavors, countries, international collectives, multinational corporations, large scale major religions, as these inevitably begin the process of disintegration and collapse in the face of climatological disaster and mass species extinction, because these are anthropocentrically driven frames of reference that cannot survive mass changes on that scale. As these begin to disintegrate and dissolve, how do human beings gather together to form small, resilient groups of individuals who support one another in living and in surviving? Like, what are the guidelines for that? You know, what are the principles at the core of that kind of community? What will guide us forward on the path ahead? What will allow us to maintain friendships and family connections, right? So the book really addresses those questions.
That's got to be a big book.
Actually, it'll be a very small book.
Hmm.
It's not going to, I mean, I don't say very small, it won't be like under 100 pages, but it won't be as long as Way of the Rose. It's a shorter, more practical book that articulates the principles in a simple way that people, anybody, ordinary people can understand and apply to their lives today.
Wonderful. I'm looking forward to it. Well, this has been really heartwarming. I am grateful that you took the time to explain all these things or talk
Oh,
about.
well, thank you so much, Gertie. Wonderful to see you again.
It's really nice to see you too. Let me turn this